Hello, I'm Alan Beam. I'm head of the International and Security Affairs program at the Australia Institute in Canberra. We recently conducted a poll in both Australia and Taiwan on attitudes of Australian and Taiwanese people to the big issue of the day, which is the growing role of China. The polling results that we got from our survey are very, very interesting because they indicate that Australia and Taiwan think about the same concerning the nature of the threat from China. Nearly half of the Australian sample and nearly half of the Taiwanese sample thought that China was going to attack Australia or attack Taiwan sometime soon or sometime in the not too distant future. That's an extraordinary result because it means that Australians are as afraid of China, though we live 5,000-6,000 kilometres away, as the Taiwanese are. But it gets a bit more interesting when we look at the number of people who think that China will attack Taiwan soon. Only about 4% of the Taiwanese who were surveyed thought that China was likely to go to war with it anytime really soon, whereas 3 times as many Australians thought that China would attack Taiwan. And that also is a really extraordinary result. Australians are sympathetic to the problems that the Taiwanese people face. We care about them and we care about the fact that they should have the right to choose their own destiny. Between 1 in 5 and 2 in 5 Australians would support Australian forces fighting in defence of Taiwan. That means that 20% of the population approximately would be prepared to see Australian Defence Forces acting in defence of Taiwan against China. That's a very high number, but it needs to be seen in the context that 80% of Australians do not support Australia going to war with China for any reason. These polling results reflect a measure of uncertainty in the minds of many Australians. That uncertainty has been fomented in part by the harsh actions of the government of China in recent years, particularly on the trade front, where the Chinese government decided that it would no longer import Australian coal, that it would not import Australian barley, that it would cease imports of Australian wine, and would not send students here. So these have hit our economy quite hard, and I think a lot of Australians are perplexed about that and hence think that China is embarked upon the use of some kind of economic and other force to push us around. But equally, it is a product of the very strong and outspoken remarks that commentators and some of our politicians indeed have made about China over the same period of time. So that we've had a ramping up of bellicosity and belligerence, of barracking and heckling going on between our politicians, which simply confuses the electorate. And so it is little surprise that the electorate has much higher levels of uncertainty and indeed of fear than they might have had previously. But equally, it's no surprise that 80% of the electorate does not want to have a war with China. Now, when we'd completed the survey, Melissa Connolly-Tyler and I prepared an analysis of the results and made a number of observations which I would now like to share with you because they may help us in the way in which we think more broadly about our relationship with China and our relationship with Taiwan. The first observation that we made is that there is no easy solution to the problem that Taiwan faces. As many of you would know, the liberation of China was completed in 1949, Now that's almost 75 years ago, with the people under Mao Zedong holding the mainland and the rest of the forces receding to Taiwan. Both sides claiming the role of government of China. And at this point, they haven't resolved between them who is the government of China, though I think the international community has, in many respects, resolved it for them. Only about 15 countries would now recognise Taiwan as being the government of China. China sits in the Security Council from Beijing, not from Taiwan. The second observation we made is that the Taiwanese people understandably want to be in charge of their own future. They don't want to be forced into any resolution of the problem that they have with China, and equally they don't want outside parties to make the resolution of that problem even more difficult. So there is a great need for the government in Taipei and the government in Beijing to take a good hard look at the problems that both of them have got and to come to the table and to negotiate them. The third point that we've made is that it has to be understood that Taiwan is not an ally of the United States. A long time ago it was. But when President Nixon decided that the United States would recognise the legitimacy of Beijing, the treaty arrangement between Taiwan and the United States was abrogated. Now that was tested in the US courts, by the way, and the US courts found that the US government had no treaty obligations with respect to Taiwan, and that situation continues to this day. The fourth point that we made is that ANZUS, the treaty that Australia has with the United States, does not extend to Taiwan. Many people think that anything that the United States and Australia might do together anywhere in the world is somehow or other pursuant to the ANZUS treaty. That's just not the case. The ANZUS treaty is quite narrow in its requirements of the United States and Australia. It extends no further than consultation and taking action that would subsequently be endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. That's all it requires. It does not require Australia to go to any or every instance of the United States using military force around the world, for whatever purpose. The fifth point that we made is that Taiwan is not an ally of Australia either. So we have no direct obligations to Taiwan. We wish Taiwan well, of course. We want the people of Taiwan to live peaceful lives, to live prosperous lives, and we wish the same for the people in China. But we have no obligation to go and defend Taiwan on any account. And finally, the sixth observation that Melissa Conley-Tyler and I made was that Australia and Taiwan don't actually share very many strategic interests. We're a long way apart, and Taiwan's situation is unique and totally different from the situation that Australia enjoys at the bottom end of Asia, with a very significant economy, a diversified global trading set of arrangements, and a stable relationship with all of our neighbours. It would be good, wouldn't it, if we could improve our relationship with China, but that will have to remain a work in progress for the time being. The important thing to remember about Taiwan is that Australia does not have any skin in the game. Taiwan is simply not Australia's business.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.